If you grew up in the 1970s, you carry a specific kind of pain that's almost impossible to explain to anyone born after 1985. You experienced a childhood that shaped your brain in ways modern neuroscience is only now beginning to understand. And here's what you need to know: you're not damaged, you're not stuck in the past, and you're not being dramatic. Your nervous system was wired under conditions that created psychological patterns researchers call adaptive hypervigilance. What you experienced wasn't just a different era. It was a fundamentally different reality that left permanent imprints on how you process safety, connection, and survival. In this video, we explore the 5 rare psychological effects that define the 1970s childhood experience. If you've ever been called too serious, too anxious, or too independent, or if you felt like you can't fully relax even when everything's objectively fine, what you're about to discover will finally make sense of your inner world. These aren't character flaws, they're the predictable outcomes of growing up in an era psychology now recognizes as uniquely formative. You developed what psychologists call learned self-sufficiency under neglect. Here's what was happening in your developing brain. During the 1970s, parental supervision looked nothing like today. You were sent outside in the morning and expected back by dinner. No cell phones, no GPS tracking, no scheduled playdates. Your brain had to develop threat assessment systems without adult guidance, which meant your amygdala, your fear center, learned to stay chronically activated. This might show up as an inability to ask for help even when you desperately need it, or feeling guilty when you're not being productive. You might find yourself solving problems alone that would benefit from collaboration simply because your neural pathways were carved during years of mandatory independence. This isn't stubbornness or trust issues. This is your brain protecting you the way it learned to when you were 7 years old and had to figure out how to get home after losing track of time 3 neighborhoods away. Psychology calls this premature autonomy development, and it creates adults who are extraordinarily capable but struggle to be vulnerable. The transition to the next reality is that self-reliance came with a hidden cost to your nervous system. You carry what researchers identify as ambient threat normalization. Your childhood existed before stranger danger hysteria, yet paradoxically featured real dangers that were simply accepted as normal life. Lead paint, asbestos insulation, cars without seatbelts, secondhand smoke everywhere, including in doctors' offices and airplanes. Your young nervous system was constantly exposed to actual toxins and hazards, but the adults around you treated these as unremarkable. Here's what this did to your psychological development. It taught your brain that danger is just the background noise of existence. You might show up today as someone who minimizes your own pain, who says things like, "It's not a big deal," when you're genuinely suffering, or who feels uncomfortable when people express concern for your well-being. This isn't emotional numbness or denial. This is adaptive desensitization. Your brain learned that survival meant not overreacting to threats because overreacting would have been constant. Psychology calls this normalized hyperarousal, where your baseline stress level is higher than it should be, but you've learned to call that feeling normal. You might notice you only recognize you're stressed when you're already at a breaking point, because your calibration for danger was set during a childhood where actual hazards were dismissed as routine. You developed what trauma specialists call emotional self-containment conditioning. The 1970s parenting philosophy actively discouraged emotional expression. Boys were told, "Big boys don't cry." Girls were told to stop being so dramatic. Everyone was told to go to your room until you could behave properly, which meant suppressing whatever you were feeling. Your developing limbic system, the emotional processing center of your brain, learned that expressing distress resulted in isolation or punishment. This might show up as difficulty identifying your own emotions until they become overwhelming, or feeling physically uncomfortable when others cry or express strong feelings around you. You might find yourself saying, "I'm fine," automatically, even to people who genuinely care and have earned your trust. This isn't emotional unavailability or coldness. This is protective emotional regulation developed under conditions where your authentic feelings were treated as behavioral problems. Psychology calls this affect suppression training, and it creates adults with remarkable emotional endurance but profound disconnection from their internal experience. Your nervous system learned that feelings were something to manage alone and quickly, not something to share or process with safe others. You carry what developmental psychology identifies as authority compliance with internal resistance. You grew up in an era of unquestioned adult authority. Teachers could physically discipline you. Parents expected immediate obedience without explanation. The phrase, "because I said so," was considered adequate justification for any rule. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking and autonomy, was developing during years when questioning authority wasn't just discouraged, it was punishable. This might show up as an uncomfortable relationship with your own anger, especially toward people in positions of power. You might find yourself complying externally while seething internally, or struggling to advocate for yourself with bosses, doctors, or institutions even when you're clearly being mistreated. This isn't weakness or cowardice. This is conditioned submission layered over natural autonomy needs, creating internal conflict your nervous system never learned to resolve. Psychology calls this hierarchical trauma, where your sense of self-worth became entangled with obedience to external authority. You develop the rare and exhausting ability to simultaneously submit and resent, comply and rebel internally, follow rules while feeling your own needs don't matter. You experience what attachment researchers call nostalgic grief with cognitive dissonance. Here's the complex reality. Your 1970s childhood was simultaneously the source of freedom modern kids will never experience and the source of neglect that shaped your nervous system's threat responses. You have genuine, beautiful memories of adventures and independence, and you also carry the pain of emotional unavailability and premature responsibility. Your brain holds both truths, and that creates a unique psychological tension. This might show up as defensiveness when younger generations criticize 1970s parenting, even though part of you knows those criticisms are valid. You might find yourself saying, "We turned out fine," while simultaneously dealing with anxiety, hypervigilance, and relationship struggles that are direct results of that era's approach to childhood. This isn't denial or nostalgia poisoning. This is the normal human response to holding competing truths about formative experiences. Psychology calls this ambivalent attachment to origin narrative, and it's why conversations about generational differences feel so emotionally charged for you. Your nervous system is trying to protect the good parts of your childhood while also processing the difficult parts, and modern discourse often forces you to choose one narrative when your lived experience contains both. If you've ever felt like you're carrying weight that people born after 1985 simply don't understand, now you know why. Your 1970s childhood created neural patterns that researchers are only beginning to study systematically. The truth is this: you're not broken or stuck. You're the product of specific developmental conditions that created specific psychological outcomes. Your hypervigilance, your self-sufficiency, your emotional containment, these were adaptive responses to your environment. They helped you survive, even if they sometimes make thriving more complicated now. Subscribe for psychology insights that explain who you really are, not who you think you should be. And if this brought up difficult emotions, consider reaching out to support. You deserve care, even if you learned you shouldn't need it.